All right. Luca Ruggieri, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. I'm not sure if you're aware, but you have a rabid fan who is sending me through multiple venues requests to get you on. And when I did a little bit of research, I was really interested in having you on, and so I'm glad to finally make it happen.
Yeah. Well, I think we both know who you're talking about, and I appreciate his efforts.
So why don't you tell my audience just a little bit about yourself? Who are you, and what did you do?
Well, I am a freshman at Columbia University, and recently, well, about month and a half ago at this point, I had an op-ed published in the Wall Street Journal in support of the Trump administration's deportation of, foreign agitators that had initiated a lot of the protests on campus. And as a result of that, as you can imagine, there was a pretty strong backlash.
So yeah, I mean, I think everyone will be familiar with what happened broadly with those protests. Obviously, the big, I guess the big ticket item was what happened at Harvard with Claudine Gay and that whole uh, just roiling disaster. But what happened at your school? What did you see?
Well, I mean, it's been going on for a while. I mean, before I even arrived at Columbia, they've had protests going on since October 2023, but it really got hot spring of 2024 when there was a huge encampment. They took over Hamilton Hall, which is one of the big buildings on campus. They took a janitor hostage, and for weeks the campus was shut down. Classes went online. And just in general, I mean, the entire flow of life at Columbia has been disrupted over the last year and a half by these protesters. And it's been really damaging. I mean, forget about the environment at the school, but I mean, it's really taken a hit to Columbia's reputation.
Yeah, in a much smaller scale, when I went to university, it was shortly after Charlottesville. So you can imagine all of the protests that were going on, relatively close geographically speaking. And it was incredible how much being around campus protesters radicalized me. At my school, there was I don't even know what you'd call them, like a gang of radical vegans who were constantly just harassing people, breaking windows on the dining hall, stuff like that. They're incredibly irritating people, all politics aside, which I mean, certainly kind of colored my experience on it. But your op-ed specifically centered on a specific man. Um, Mahmoud Kali, I believe was his name. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mahmoud Khalil.
And so what happened? Why was he a relevant figure?
So essentially, the deal with him, he is, if I'm not mistaken, he's Lebanese. Um, First, went to the UK on some sort of refugee status to study. Then he got a scholarship and a to come study at Columbia. And in the time that he's been at Columbia, virtually it seems that all he's been up to is organizing a lot of these protests. He was one of the lead figures in the encampment last year, which turned violent. And I guess the center premise of my op-ed is that this guy is not American, and he has, in my opinion, he's been granted this great privilege to study at one of the world's premier universities. And how does he thank the country that offered him this opportunity? He goes out, and organizes these protests that are anti-American and just generally anti-Western. I mean, forget about the internal politics of whatever's going on in Israel and Palestine. These protesters have an open contempt for America and Western civilization, and essentially the basis of my op-ed is that we should stop taking these people and stop discriminating against talented, ambitious young Americans who are patriotic, and give them spots at our top schools so that we stop, poisoning our elite, because this is essentially where we produce our elite. And we don't want people like Khalil running our country down the line.
Yeah, it's an argument that I'm sympathetic to to put things mildly, I'm not the biggest fan of the nation of Israel, for fiscal as well as political reasons. But nonetheless, right, when you have, as you've said, when you have given a foreigner a great privilege, right? Sorry about that. When you have given them a free ride to a prestigious university, which will prepare them to enter the elite, and they have taken that gift and spat at you, it's a very reasonable reaction to say, well, why should I put up with this? And you mentioned, the discrimination aspect of it as well. I'm not sure if you caught this. Did you see the recent hack at NYU?
I did. Yep.
So, weird aside, turns out the hacker followed me on Twitter, which, like small world, I guess. But he or she, up for debate, released internal data on NYU's admissions, basically the stuff they don't want you to see. And what it revealed was that people like you and I, Luca, basically operate at plus or minus about a 10 to 15% disadvantage, pulling numbers from my memory here, right? That effectively you had to be, significantly smarter than average in order to go to the school. And again, to your point, right? If you are selecting for an elite, you can look at that one of two ways. You are barring people who should be there from being there, or alternately, you are elevating underqualified people into these positions. And before we went live, you mentioned the prestige of these institutions, which, I mean, there's no two ways to say this, has been dramatically crumbling. And I think it's inconceivable to say that that isn't a direct result of their admissions policy.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at these universities, really, I think they're a tremendous asset in the macro sense to our country, because the purpose of the Ivy League historically was essentially to be a finishing school for the future elites of our country, and you congregated the best and the brightest in one spot for 4 years, and then down the line you have all these people who know each other, and you can build something real out of that. You look at one of the main reasons why Roosevelt, why FDR was so successful in absolutely just completely transforming the fundamental tenets of the U.S. government in the 30s. It's because he used the Ivy Leagues essentially as elite incubators to staff his administration and the government. And I don't think that right wingers are a lot of the right is correct in writing off the Ivy League as oh, it's useless. We need to get rid of it, because it's not. I've had a lot of people tell me, oh, why'd you go to Columbia? Why not Hillsdale or something like that? Which I'm not to criticize Hillsdale, but the reality is that there's a certain element that you get at the Ivy League that can't be replicated. And the sort of anti-college, anti-elite sentiment that goes around, I think, is very counterproductive. And something we should really be looking at is how do we take back these institutions, which I think what the administration is doing now is really a step in the right direction, because I do think you have to go really tough against the Ivies, but we shouldn't be abandoning them, and we shouldn't be abandoning elite institutions, because that's the way that we win. We win by taking over these institutions and producing a new elite. That's the issue that we have. Our current elite is just so decadent and useless. They're betraying our country, and we need to replace them. But we're not going to be able to do that without any laying the groundwork for that. And we need to get our best people into these schools and start producing some top level people, because I think that's how we win.
So just a hypothetical, right? This is a debate that has been raging in conservative circles for a long time. But one of the problems that has been faced by conservatives, right wingers, especially religious people, is that when they send their kids to university, they lose them. there's an attrition rate. And particularly in rural areas, they tend to lose their local kind of 1%. So similarly, right, you have this guy from Lebanon, he gets scooped up, whisked away to America, devotes his time to American leftist politics, which is both a net negative for America, but also for Lebanon. And there's an alternate world in which he is a very successful Lebanese doctor, hypothetically, of course. So if you are, this red state conservative talking about your children, why would you run that risk, right? I would rather have, a son who's a successful local businessman than a son who decides he's a daughter while at Berkeley, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a valid concern, and I understand why a lot of people view these institutions in that light. But I think the reality is that if you have a kid who's really sharp and they have the right values, they were raised right. If I think that for the sake of the country, they're gonna be a lot more useful at a top school than they would be in rural Georgia or wherever you want to whatever example you want to talk about. Of course, I mean there are some examples of these these people who come from red state or whatever, good family, good values, and then they go to Berkeley and then they come back, some blue-haired freak. But I think generally speaking, that's pretty rare. And if you have a really sharp kid with the right values, that's not going to happen. If anything, I think an Ivy League school is the best place you could send them because it's going to put them in a position. Because really, you look at these schools now, the vast majority of the people at Ivy League universities and just top schools in general are really not that impressive. I mean, you think like you look at Columbia, we have like a 3% acceptance rate. It shocks me honestly when I look at the people who go to this school. Like seriously, I mean, out of the 97% of people they reject, there's got to be some that are better than what they have. Because I mean, first off, if you look at the demographics of Columbia, it's in a position where you really can't make an argument that these are the best people according to merit. I mean, you just have so many people, really unintelligent people who get brought in for diversity reasons or whatever. So just basically to break down like the average Ivy's demographics, you have maybe about like 20% of the school that is black, usually comes from some disadvantaged background, and they have a tremendous advantage when it comes to admissions. I mean, it's I mean, by far they are the most obscene example of racial favoritism in the admission system. But I mean, if you were talking about a truly merit-based system, instead of 20% of the student body, they would make up maybe 1% at most. And so you have like 20% of the student body that you can write off. And then the same goes for Hispanics. Obviously it's a little bit tougher for Hispanics to get in, but say that they're another 20% and like 15% of them are just sort of useless diversity hires, not there on their own merit. Then you get to the non super diversity hires. You have at these schools maybe about the remaining 60% is split about even, Asian and white. When you look at Asian students, they are in there on their own merits, but by and large, it's you're not really looking at the sort of talent that an Ivy League school should be selecting for. There a lot of them are very intelligent, but it tends to be a more more of an ability for test taking and just general that sort of thing. But they're not really the people you would expect to be leading or innovating in the future. And then when you look at the white students at a lot of the Ivies, the vast majority of them are either recruited athletes or they're the children of legacies, big donors, who are not really in there on their own merits, and they're not really that useful in the future. So realistically, when you look at an Ivy League school, you've got maybe about out of 10%, maybe 15% of the student body is there on actual merit, and they have designs for greater things in the future. So you're talking about 15% of these universities are intelligent people. 85% should not be there. So if you're one of those intelligent people, you can really go far at one of these institutions. They are still great connectors. Obviously it's not like it was, back in like the 50s or whatever. I mean, the Skull and Bones is not what it once was, but if you're smart, and you want to do something great with your life, that is the place to be. It's obviously receded. It was way better in the past, but it's really a question. Do you want to live a life of mediocrity or do something great? And if you want to do something great, the Ivies are the place to start, in my opinion.
This was something I noticed at school as well. Non-traditional path through education, went to a small, prestigious liberal arts school, dropped out, finished later. And I have a very distinct memory of sitting in class with a kid. And we were, maybe 3-4 weeks into first semester. So not long. And, for almost everyone, the transition from high school to college is a little difficult. So, you can kind of cut people some slack. They're adjusting. But it was very, very clear that this kid was in over his head. He had no idea what he was doing. And when I tried to help him, the misunderstandings, right? The place where we were starting was so much lower that it was almost pointless. It was like, look, dude, I can't teach you, all of a remedial calculus course because your Calc 2 exam is in 3 weeks, right? Like you were kind of cooked here. And, that moment really kind of crystallized as like, okay, this is the representation of this problem, right? That very clearly you shouldn't be here. Maybe there is a place for you, but this isn't it. And I think that obviously, there's still a hardcore of capable people anywhere. One of the things that I think is interesting, and this is something I noticed, when I went back and when I finished school, because my university was pretty heavily Chinese. There was basically a Chinese neighborhood with the children of these oligarchs would drive around in Lamborghinis, which made me feel slightly inadequate in my moderately priced used 2006 Volkswagen Jetta. But point is, the thing I noticed was that what you said about being very, very focused on test taking. I definitely picked up on that. And connected to that was the most shameless cheating I have ever seen. Look, like it's college, people cheat, you get used to it. But the level, the scale, and the shamelessness was just absolutely absurd. I'm curious, have you seen anything similar?
Oh yeah, 100%. Just generally speaking, the academic aspect of higher education has totally lost all legitimacy, in my opinion. I do think people are right in criticizing academia in those regards, because it's just, to say that it's flawed doesn't even begin to describe the situation that we're in. People just universities now, I mean, even if you look at a school like Harvard or Columbia, they're basically just all diploma mills now. People are not interested in using a college education to learn. They're just there to get a degree and to max out their GPA, so that they can follow through the either the investment banking or consulting pipeline or whatever they do. But there's not there's not a lot of learning actually going on at these schools. And a lot of that is because, they've been politicized for so long. You look at a lot of the staff, the faculty at these universities, they're not the most capable themselves. Um, it's it's really disappointing in my opinion, and you just have so many students who are in here just to get a degree, and then to follow through one of these pre-established pipelines. And there are certain groups that do that more frequently than others. And it just it's sort of a general trend that I see. People who are in this space. It's all about extraction. There's nothing about building. Like these, a lot of the people who go to these schools they don't want to build something. They're not looking to contribute to the United States. They just want to extract. A lot of the people you see, it's just extraction, extraction, extraction. It's very parasitic. It's all about what they can do to benefit themselves and their own group. And a lot of times it's extract from the United States, whether it be intellectual property or just social capital, and they use it to benefit their their home countries or their own groups, but it's not. They don't view themselves as part of a broader American nation.
Just for curiosity, how old were you during COVID?
I was 14 when the lockdown started.
Okay. So I was in school, I was in college rather when it happened. And that was a very clean breaking point. The standards before and after were radically, radically different for both students and professors. The quality of teaching, obviously during the pandemic, but even after, once we returned, it was abysmal. It was basically everyone realized no one had to care. I mean, down to the point where, there are multiple classes that I have high marks in that I did nothing for, right? It was like, well, what's the point of learning if, the test isn't going to matter and I can just get an A? And that kind of attitude of, well, I guess we don't have to care anymore seems to have kind of permeated the whole thing. And to your point about the very transactional nature of education, I mean, that runs both ways. And the amount of begging I get from my beloved alma mater, just saying, give us money, give us money, give us money, after, the shockingly poor education I received during COVID. You can understand why there's no love lost there. But on the other end, to your point, right, the idea of education has, radically shifted from something you earn, right? You yourself, go through the process of, learning how to research, making the kind of important social connections, to effectively serving as, a gold star on the end of your report card, right? Did this, and this, got a XYZ GPA at, insert school. And again, right, it's no shock that as that became commodified, as it became something for everyone, right? Every, kid with above room temperature IQ is supposed to go to school. It's no shock that that declined. And to your point earlier, right, I do think that there is an overemphasis in conservative circles on kind of a romanticized idea of the trades. And look, like there's a great number of tradesmen who listen to the show, and I just want to say, I am not talking about you unless you haven't given me money, in which case I am. But really, right, the problem is not necessarily everyone should go to school or everyone should be a tradesman. It's the idea that, well, there are different strategies for different people. And much in the same way that, a 105 IQ, college senior is probably best served elsewhere. Are you really making a great society if you've got, someone who could be, a member of the elite class, running a certainly highly successful, local business, right? The question is like, where is that person best used? So I want to pivot back to the op-ed you wrote. We talked about, the points you made, your critiques, but what was the reaction? How did that go over with with the other students at your university?
Well, the reaction was something else. Right off the bat, I knew that what I wrote wouldn't be very popular with Columbia students, but it was in the opinion section of the Wall Street Journal. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't think it would catch on so quickly, but within a couple hours of the piece being published, there's this app called Side Chat, which is essentially like an anonymous version of Twitter. You need a Columbia email to sign up, but it's all anonymous. Within a couple hours of my piece coming out, there were already people posting about it on there, and people calling uh, for my death. Someone wanted a fatwa placed on me. There was some pretty entertaining stuff as well. One of them photoshopped my face onto an SS officer, and that was on the front page of the New York Post like a couple days later, which was I've got to say, they did a pretty decent job with the Photoshop, in my opinion. That was pretty creative, but we're at an American university campus, and I have to deal with people calling for a fatwa to be placed on me. I mean, that just tells you these people, they shouldn't be at Columbia, and much less Columbia. They shouldn't be, in the US or in Europe or anywhere else. They should be back where they belong, in their home countries. They People who behave like this don't deserve a place in Western society.
Sorry, I successfully muted myself in the software that I use almost daily. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think that kind of hysterical reaction, again, it indicates several things, which is one, these are not people used to discipline, right? They're used to being indulged at every turn, and that's really what's galling about this is these are people who have an incredibly high opinion of themselves and yet act like emotionally incontinent children. I obviously it's inexcusable, right, to call for someone's death for a letter. Uh, Calling a fatwa is, I don't know, it's amusing if nothing else. Obviously, I hope nothing comes of it, but that has to be kind of a personal badge of honor, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I One of the other things that I noticed when doing research into you is that you've started a polling company. I'm curious to know more about that process because polling is sort of an opaque art to me.
Yeah, yeah. So I actually started that while I was in high school. I, so the thing is, I've always, since I was, very young, I've been set. I said I want to go to an Ivy League school no matter what. Because that's the ticket into the elite. So I was dead set getting into one of these schools, and the problem is that no matter how smart you are, if you're a white guy, a 1600 on the SAT isn't going to cut it. You have to do something better. So I basically figured out, you have to do something, that really, uh, gets you out in the press, or it just does something to distinguish yourself. So, I'm trying to remember when this was. I think it was in the end of my sophomore year of high school. Um, I I decided, I've always had an inclination for the mathematic and quantitative sides of things. And I've always been very politically inclined, and the natural convergence of that was polling, essentially. So I decided, you know, I might as well take a stab at this in my own right. The established pollsters have been so wrong over and over and over again. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? So when I turned 16, my parents told me either I could have a car or take the money to do something with it. So I had this money I wanted to do something with. So I started this company. I ran my first poll, and I published it, put it out on a Twitter account. I didn't think it was really going to go anywhere, but then out of the blue, Nate Silver, from 538, reached out to me, asking, "Oh, can you send your methodology or whatever, to prove that your polls are real?" And we sent that over. And then as soon as I got on 538, which is the gold standard of polling, I got a lot of coverage, for being the youngest pollster in the country. Then I got profiled in the New York Times and all this other stuff, which, that's basically how I got into Columbia. Because otherwise, if you don't do something like that, you're not going to get in, if you're, a talent. Unless your parents donate a building, you have to do something like this. If you're somebody of my demographic group.
So I understand that, a certain amount of this is probably a trade secret, but hypothetically, right? If you're a aspiring young man, you want to start up your own polling company, what do you do? Like, do you just start calling random numbers in the phone book?
Yeah. So what I ended up doing is so established pollsters, the way that they do it is that they have like a room full of people just dialing phone numbers from a list. And that gets very expensive, because you have to pay people to do that. And it's very time consuming. So what I ended up doing is that I use this software called IVR, Interactive Voice Registry, which it's basically it's a lot of scam callers use it actually, but you just you have it generate phone numbers for an area code, and then it calls them. It's all automated, and then a pre-recorded message comes up, and the person who you call, they pick up the phone, and it's a robot essentially reading out to you. In the Pennsylvania Senate race, would you vote for Bob Casey? You press 1, or Dave McCormick, press 2, and then it records that. And we get the raw data back. So that's and it's much cheaper than the traditional way. So that's how I started out doing it.
So you mentioned that legacy polling outfits are very bad at calling elections. Why is that? Are they just bad at math? Is there something wrong in their methodology, or is there perhaps some sort of political bias there?
There's definitely a political bias. Like, the thing about polling is just it's very it's not a science. It's a pseudoscience at best. Obviously, having a good quantitative model helps you out. But the raw data that you get from the polling will never be, actually representative of an election. So you have to do a lot of, statistical stuff to get a decently realistic picture of what the election is actually going to turn out like. So there's a lot of weighting involved, and a lot of the time when you're doing this, it's down to personal choice, how you do it. And I think a lot of the times, the more established pollsters, they're biased in one direction, and that bias, clearly bleeds through in their results. But just generally, the traditional way of polling is, in my opinion, completely antiquated. And I think within 10 years at most, you're not going to have, the way it works now is going to be completely gone. You're not going to have anybody, sitting at a desk calling numbers out of the voter registry anymore. What I've started doing now at Patriot Polling is that I'm working to build an AI model, basically, that, if you feed it a lot of basically just a lot of demographic information, election data, that sort of thing. Just feed it with a ton of data, and ask it, you know, for a certain voter of these demographics, how would it vote? How would he vote? And run that over and over and over again. You tend to get a pretty accurate picture of how elections come out. And what I'm trying to build, I'm trying to see if I can build something that can replicate that, and do it for cheaper, and be more accurate than the traditional polling outfits.
So let's talk about past results. How have your predictions stacked up against, actual real world events?
Well, we were, probably the most, if not at least one of the most accurate pollsters in 2024. We nailed every race, every state in the presidential race. We got, I think we only got one Senate race wrong. We did really well in 2024. In the midterms, 2022, we also did pretty well. We missed a couple of races. That was our first time doing these polls, but we in the 2 years between 2022 and 2024, we worked a lot. Um, we improved a lot of our models and that sort of thing. So in the last election, we were spot on.
Yeah, that's certainly impressive. And obviously, I realize it's much more difficult to project out in the future. But I'm curious, have you been following at all the whisperings about who the Democrats will run in 2028?
I have, and honestly, I've got to say, I've been seeing all this stuff about, Kamala Harris and AOC. Um, my gut tells me, they're not going to win if they run somebody like that. In my opinion, they've got to run somebody. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like him, but Gavin Newsom, for all of his faults, he's a charismatic, good-looking guy. I mean, he comes off a lot like JFK, in my opinion. Like they've got to run somebody like that if they want to win. I think.
Well, clearing the bar of is a normal human being. you
Yeah.
know, I mean, say what you will about AOC. She is charismatic. The problem is divisive is probably an understatement. That's a figure who's capped at, a maximum, 30-35% support. It's a bit too extreme. She's kind of a nutcase.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, look, I'm not a DC insider, but Kamala Harris was a very poor candidate. That's probably an understatement. Uh, in addition to not exactly having a great record, among Democrats, just an absolute black hole of charisma.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at someone like Newsom, who certainly has black marks on his record. Right, the handling of the California wildfires will likely come around to haunt him. But he's a traditionally attractive guy with a family who runs one of the most important states in the Democratic coalition. In normal times, he's a shoo-in, right? Now, obviously, because he is normal, that does kind of put him at odds with the stated preferences of the Democratic Party. We'll see on that front, but I think your analysis is correct there. So, in the kind of more short to medium term, obviously, there has been widely conflicting narratives around Trump's popularity and that of his actions, particularly as regards the economy. What do you make of that? How popular can we say the president actually is?
Well, you see a lot of data. A lot of people are putting out these numbers saying, "Oh, Trump has like a 40% approval rating or whatever," which I think those are probably accurate. But the thing that people aren't talking about is that a lot of people might disapprove of what he's doing in terms of tariffs and his general style. But when you compare it to you know uh, the competition, how he stacks up against the Democrats, he still wins. A lot of the numbers are still showing, even though the average voter might disapprove of the way he's handling the economy, when you ask them, who do you think would be doing a better job handling the economy right now, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris? They say Donald Trump. It's always Trump. People might have problems with the way that Trump handles things, but deep down, I think uh, the American people are trust him in leading the country. I don't think they always understand what his modus operandi is, but I think they Americans know that Donald Trump is a pair of capable hands. Where you look at Democratic leadership, they're just totally incompetent. Uh, last time, they had a dementia patient as president of the United States. I think it's going to take a long time for them to recover the trust of the American people.
So, one of the interesting things to me, and this ties both of our conversations together, is the degree to which, how much of this kind of woke nonsense, how much of that is tactical play versus how much of that is firmly held belief? Because if you look at something like admissions, for instance, well, the law, the Supreme Court has been clear, this is not permissible behavior. And yet this practice continues, right? There will be, a new workaround. You see this at, institutions like Harvard, for instance, that they have basically said, like, we're going to do it anyway. Obviously that could prove to, start another legal battle, but take that to the Democratic Party as a whole, right? Obviously, the correct answer, if your main goal was to win elections, would be to moderate, right? The common refrain is run a Bill Clinton. But do you see that as being something they can do? Are they able to put the brakes on themselves to win, if nothing else, even if it's a cynical ploy?
I don't think they can do it. Really, I think perhaps there are certain individuals in the Democratic Party, Newsom, for example. I don't think he's, personally, totally overtaken with this stuff. But the general base of the Democratic Party, especially the younger they are, this is all that they've known. This is their guiding ideology in life. When they see, this anti-woke, anti-DEI wave that has come over the last year or two, this isn't a political issue for them. This is a civilizational issue. The post 1964 civil rights regime. That's not something that these people view as amendable anymore. The entire diversity, civil rights mob that has been festering at these universities, for the last 60 years. It's, I guess the way I would put it is that a lot of people have only seen the consequences of this, really, really left-wing ideology manifesting in the last decade or so. Before that, to the average person, there was things pretty much were going on as they've always gone on. But if you look, post Civil Rights Act, so for the last 60 years, the groundwork has been laid at this for this at especially at the elite universities, which is where a lot of the Democratic leadership has come from. So these people have been, this is all that they know. This is like the gospel to them, and this is what they think America is. They're not willing to give it up, and that's why you see, if these were people who were purely operating off of what was politically expedient, the Democrats would have totally pivoted to the to the center, since Trump won. But it's clear that they're not rational actors. So really, I think it shows you the power of capturing these institutions, because that's what these, anti-Western, anti-white radicals did to our elite schools in the 60s. And what we're seeing now is the direct downstream result of that. If we can do something like that, it doesn't. I don't know how we do it, but we need to set up some sort of elite ecosystem, because that's the problem. There is not really a credentialed right wing ecosystem, in my opinion. I mean, you've got there's no especially on the intellectual side of things, you don't have really a fully functioning right wing ecosystem like you do on the left. We don't have the human capital to do that yet, which is exactly why abandoning these top universities is not it's not a good idea. We need to fight for them. But just generally speaking, a lot of people, I really wouldn't call myself a conservative at this point, because the civil rights regime that has existed post 1964 in America, that's, at this point, that's not an aberration from the norm. That is the norm. And you really need to do, I think some you need to have, a revolution in terms of who's staffing, our government, who are the members of our elite, right? The post 1964 elite has been completely indoctrinated in that agenda, and I think you have to bring down the ancien regime in this regard, because the Democrats, the Democratic leadership, just elite leadership in general, they are gung ho on this stuff. They're all in. This isn't a political gambit. This is all that they know, and this is their concept of right and wrong, and they're not going to give it up easily, in my opinion.
So one last question, and then I'll let you go. Much ink has been spilled on the political identity of Generation Z. One of the most interesting trends has been the widening gulf between men and women. Generally speaking, young people tend to be left-wing, and while that is still technically true in aggregate of Generation Z, albeit only slightly, young men have gone hard for Trump. I'm curious, one, why do you think that is the case? And two, how do you think that split shakes out over the life of the generation?
Mhm. Well, I think what you're seeing is that, this is going back to what I was just talking about. The new liberal, the post 1964 liberal regime is, that's what is socially acceptable in America at this point. This is what people were brought up in that tradition. And if you look at historical trends, women, recently women have always been more liberal than men, but you go back, 40 years, women were considered, substantially more conservative than the men. And you go back 100 years, women were always the more religious, the more conservative, the more traditional of the two sexes. I think generally what we're seeing now is that being a right winger, being a Trump supporter is it's a counterculture in modern America, and aggressive young men are a lot more willing to openly support that and take the social consequences of doing so. While women, I think just biologically are a lot more inclined to support the status quo and what they've been taught to know, to support, and uh, that's what they're doing. So I think it's all going to be a matter of time. If we take a driver's seat in elite opinion in America, if we totally revolutionize our elite, then I think women will start moving to the right. But I think generally that the political position of most women is much more easily influenced by whatever the mainstream status quo opinion is than men.
Well, Luca, I think there's certainly something to that. If people want to find more of you, more of your work, what's a good way for them to do that?
Well, you can find me on Twitter. My account's just Luca Ruggieri. LinkedIn. Really anything. But Twitter's probably the best way.
Well, great. I will link those down in the description. As far as my stuff, the Jay Burden Show is available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you want to support us, you can either do that directly or through our sponsors, Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching. If you're looking for an update, JD has discovered new ways to make me suffer, and I am walking like I am 85 years old, all due to him. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, check out Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching. You can also check out North Appalachian Supply for all of your gear needs. Again, Luca, I appreciate it. And everyone at home, keep your head up. Life can't last forever. Good night.